In 2023, a 7-year-old boy stopped speaking after something happened at his old school. No witnesses, no explanation, just one strange detail. Every day since, he's drawn the same thing: a maze, a red X, and a face, watching from the woods. Now, after moving to a new town for a fresh start, his mother realizes the drawings match a real forest, a real playground, and a real girl who vanished there last fall. No leads, no sound, until now, because last night he drew her again. And this time, she's waving. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, because some warnings don't come with words. The town of Pine Haven looked peaceful from the windshield. Quaint, with its single main street and hand-painted signs, it was the kind of place where people still waved at strangers and lawn-mowers hummed on Saturdays. For Julia Carter, it was more than charming. It was a second chance. In the back seat, her son Theo sat quietly, his seatbelt snug across his small frame. He stared out the window, fingers twitching against the hem of his hoodie. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in nearly 2 years, but Julia had learned to read him in other ways. His sketches, his silences, the way he gripped her hand when overwhelmed. The past wasn't something she wanted to unpack today. Not yet. They turned onto Willow Lane, a sleepy street lined with tall pines and tidy sloped yards. The rental house was small but neat, painted a soft gray with white trim and a porch swing that groaned softly in the wind. "This is it," Julia said gently, not expecting a response. Theo only blinked, then reached for the backpack at his side. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh paint. Julia let Theo explore while she started unpacking the kitchen. His footsteps padded softly from room to room until they paused at the sliding glass door that faced the backyard. There, beyond the brittle grass and an aging fence, was Pine Haven Elementary and its playground. The jungle gym was rusted at the joints. The swing sets creaked. The forest loomed just behind it, a dense curtain of green, quiet and unknowable. Theo stood motionless, eyes locked on the trees. "That's your school," Julia said, joining him at the glass. "It's just a short walk. You'll start tomorrow." He turned to her slowly, then back to the forest. His fingers resumed their quiet fidget. The next morning came faster than Julia had hoped. Theo didn't protest as she helped him dress, pack his backpack, and walk the short distance to the school. He was always calm in the morning. His storms came later, usually when the day had asked too much of him. The school building was brick, square, and ordinary. Inside, it smelled like pencil shavings and hand sanitizer. Mrs. Haynes, Theo's special education instructor, greeted them at the office with a warm smile and a clipboard. "He's welcome here," she assured Julia after the introductions. "We'll take things slow. His IEP looks thorough. We'll follow every note. Don't worry." Julia smiled gratefully. She wanted to believe it would be enough. When she picked Theo up at 2:45, he walked to her without hesitation, his backpack bouncing slightly with each step. Still silent. Still unreadable. "How was it?" she asked, crouching to meet his eyes. He didn't answer, but pulled a piece of paper from his bag and handed it to her. Julia unfolded it slowly. It wasn't a drawing of the playground or the classroom or stick figures holding hands. It was strange. A set of interconnected shapes, circles, squares, long lines like paths that looped and curled back. At the bottom corner, in red crayon, a tiny arrow pointed to an X. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, even though it unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. Theo looked up at her for just a moment, his eyes sharp, focused, and then looked away. That evening, as Julia unpacked another box of kitchenware, she taped the drawing to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a cat. Outside, dusk fell across the neighborhood, casting long shadows from the pine trees. From her place at the sink, Julia could see the edge of the playground, the silhouettes of the swing set swaying gently with the wind. The X on the drawing bothered her. She didn't know why, but she couldn't look away from it. The second morning at Pine Haven Elementary went smoothly, almost too smoothly. Theo didn't resist getting ready, didn't cling at the school door. He walked into the building with quiet resolve, his backpack slung over his shoulder like armor. 2 days in, and we're winning, Julia whispered to herself in the car. But by the time she picked him up, the feeling of ease had evaporated. Theo climbed into the back seat, silent as usual. He didn't buckle his seatbelt right away. He pulled another piece of paper from his bag and handed it to her with a look that almost seemed urgent. Julia glanced down at it before pulling out of the school loop. This one was different than yesterday's. The same looping, deliberate lines, this time more structured, like walkways and turns. In the corner, another X, but it was in a different place. She parked it home before she really examined it. At the kitchen table, with a mug of cooling tea in her hand, she compared today's drawing to the one from the day before. The style was unmistakably Theo's. He always had a strange, obsessive precision with shape and space. But this wasn't random. The two drawings connected. Julia pulled an old envelope from a drawer and began to trace the lines. When placed side by side, the shapes didn't just fit, they matched. It was as though Theo was mapping something piece by piece. A map of what? That night she called Dr. Ravi, Theo's therapist from Portland. They hadn't spoken since the move, but she needed to hear a familiar voice. "He's drawing again," she said, after updating him. "Something geometric, like a maze." "That's not unusual for kids on the spectrum," Dr. Ravi replied gently. "It can be a form of self-regulation. Organization through design." Julia hesitated. What if it's not just design? There was a pause. "Do you think he's copying something?" "I'm not sure," she said. "But the shapes, they're connected. Each day's drawing builds on the last. If it continues, document them. Keep everything dated and observe when and how he draws them. It could still be expressive behavior, communication through symbol." Julia thanked him and hung up, but her unease lingered. The next morning she walked Theo to school. He held her hand tightly as they approached the fence that bordered the playground. It was oddly quiet. A cluster of parents stood near the entrance, speaking in low voices. Julia caught a phrase as she passed. "Anniversary's next week." And still no sign. Inside, Mrs. Haynes waved Theo in, then motioned to Julia. "Do you have a moment?" she asked. They stepped into the front office. Mrs. Haynes lowered her voice. "Just a courtesy. I wanted you to know, this time of year can be hard for the school. One of our students went missing last fall. Her name was Emily Watts. She was in 2nd grade. Julia blinked. "Missing from where?" Mrs. Haynes nodded grimly toward the back. "The playground. Last seen near the woods. They say she liked to wander." "She wasn't found?" "No." Her voice dropped even lower. "It was very quiet after. Some families moved away. People got scared. No foul play confirmed, but there were rumors." Julia's skin prickled. "Why are you telling me?" "Because," Mrs. Haynes said, her eyes glancing toward Theo's classroom, "your son is very observant. Children like him sometimes notice things others don't. If he brings up anything unusual, let us know." At home, Julia pulled the latest drawing from Theo's backpack and added it to the growing lineup on the fridge. 3 pages now. The patterns continued, more intricate by the day. This time, the X was larger, pressed down harder, almost agitated. Beneath it, Theo had drawn something new, a crooked shape like a tree, and beside it, something like a child's stick figure lying down. Her heart skipped. It could have been anything, but it felt like a message. The next morning, Julia woke early. The sky outside the bedroom window was a faded indigo, and the wind stirred the pine trees like the deep breath before a whisper. Theo was already awake, sitting cross-legged at the kitchen table in his pajamas, pencil in hand. He didn't look up when she entered. He was drawing again. Julia moved slowly, careful not to startle him. She poured coffee, then leaned against the counter, watching him. Today's paper looked different, darker, bolder, more intentional. When he was finished, he slid it across the table. "Thank you," she said, as she always did. This time, the drawing had a distinct center, a thick black spiral. Around it, the patterns formed paths and loops like before, but now they radiated from that dark heart. At the edge, as always, sat an X, but now it was joined by a symbol, a tiny triangle with a dot inside it. The shapes seemed familiar. Her eyes flicked to the fridge where the others were displayed. She arranged all 4 in a row. The shapes aligned, the edges touched. The lines formed a larger, unified map, each page part of a whole. Her stomach turned. The playground sat just beyond their backyard. She had seen it from the porch every day since they arrived, but she'd never walked beyond it, never entered the woods behind the school. Until now. It was a short walk, just 2 blocks, but Julia felt every step. The school grounds were empty this early, but she kept to the fence line, slipping through a gap where the chain link bent back. Her shoes crunched across bark chips as she approached the swing set, its chains groaning gently in the breeze. From here, she could see the edge of the trees. The path beyond the playground was narrow and uneven, marked by decades of children's feet and perhaps something else. She hesitated, heart thumping, then stepped forward and followed it. The trees swallowed the light almost immediately. Sunlight broke through in scattered rays, but it was dim, quiet, too quiet. There were no birds, no leaves rustling beyond the reach of her footsteps. After 10 minutes of walking, she found a clearing. A wide, round patch of moss-covered earth opened before her. At the center sat a small pile of stones, deliberately arranged in a careful stack. Not natural, not accidental. She circled the stones. There, beside the pile, embedded partly in dirt, was a scrap of fabric, pink, frayed at the edges. Her breath caught. She crouched down and brushed the dirt away. The fabric was torn, faded, but it looked like it might have once belonged to a child's shirt. Then she heard it, a twig snapping behind her. Julia stood up quickly, eyes scanning the trees. "Hello?" she called out, trying to sound calm. "Is someone there?" No answer. She turned in a slow circle, her ears straining. For a moment, she thought she saw movement between the trunks, a shadow slipping behind a pine, but when she looked again, it was gone. A branch cracked again, this time louder. She backed away from the stones, heart pounding, trying to remember which path she had taken. The trees all looked the same now. Then, a voice. Low, aged, and close. "You shouldn't be here." Julia spun around. A man stood just beyond the tree line, leaning on a wooden walking stick. His jacket was patched at the elbows, and his hair was white under a canvas hat. He looked more curious than threatening, but his gaze was sharp. "I'm sorry," she said, catching her breath. "I didn't mean to trespass. I'm new in town. My son drew this place." The man's expression didn't change. "Little boy, quiet? Lives on Willow Lane." She blinked. "Yes, you know him." "Seen him. Likes to watch the trees. They listen, you know." Julia wasn't sure how to respond. "You said I shouldn't be here. Why?" He gestured toward the stones. "That place, it doesn't forget things easily. Things that happen out here don't always stay buried." Julia felt a chill. Was it about Emily Watts? The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she thought he might walk away. Then he said, "That girl wasn't the first, just the one they noticed." Before she could ask more, he turned and walked into the trees. vanishing as if he'd never been there. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the forest drawings spread out before her. In the center of them all, Theo's spiral, and the strange symbol he had added this morning. A triangle, with a dot in the middle. She pulled out her laptop and searched everything she could think of. Geometry, forest signs, missing children's cases. Nothing concrete came up, but then she remembered something. Emily Watts. She typed her name into the search bar. The article that came up was brief and clinical. Emily, 7 years old, last seen during afternoon recess. No signs of a struggle. The playground was full of children, but no one saw her leave. A pink shirt, black sneakers, a small unicorn backpack. Julia closed the laptop slowly. She stood and walked to Theo's room. He was asleep, the covers twisted around his small frame, a pencil still tucked in his hand. On the floor, a new drawing. This one was just trees. Tall, black trees that leaned in toward something small in the center. And at the base of one tree, a tiny, stick-figure girl. Julia woke with a start at 3:12 a.m. Her dreams had been tangled, looping forests and small hands reaching through the branches. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the drawings on the fridge. She padded softly into the kitchen, flipping on a dim light. The drawings looked different in the low glow, darker, heavier, as if they were breathing under the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The X marks pulled at her. Each one was in a slightly different place, but always anchored to a specific point, somewhere just inside the forest line behind the school. Theo's drawings weren't just art. They were a message. By the time the sun rose, Julia had made a decision. She dropped Theo off at school, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "Be brave today, sweetheart." He didn't speak, but he squeezed her hand twice. It was a ritual they'd created during therapy. 2 squeezes meant, "I hear you. I'll try." Back at home, Julia retrieved the drawings, a flashlight, and a rolled-up printed map of the town she'd picked up from the library. She laid Theo's artwork over it, tracing the path he seemed to be outlining. Everything led back to the forest. Everything led back to the X. She entered the trees just before noon. This time, she came prepared. Hiking boots, a compass, and a marking ribbon she tied to the first tree, just in case. The trail narrowed the deeper she went, overgrown in places, as if resisting her passage. 30 minutes in, she found the clearing again. The stone pile was still there. She approached it slowly, her breath catching. Something had changed. The stones were disturbed, some knocked aside, and something new lay at the base of the central rock, half buried in dirt. A metal charm, shaped like a heart. Julia crouched and picked it up. The chain was broken, tarnished, but the charm was intact. On the back, a name was engraved in soft cursive. Emily. Her breath left her in a rush. It was real, all of it. This wasn't Theo's imagination. He'd led her here. Back at home, she sat on the porch, the heart charm in her hand, heart pounding with the enormity of what it meant. The town still had posters of Emily Watts up in the school's front office. No one had found her, until now. Theo came home that afternoon calmer than usual. He placed a fresh drawing on the table before saying anything. She turned it over carefully. This one was a maze. Intricate, precise. The same tree outlines as before, but now connected by paths and circles. At the center was a dark spiral, and beneath it, written in faint pencil, "She fell." Julia stared at the paper, trembling. Theo had never written on his drawings before. That evening, she called the Pine Haven Police Department. A woman with a tired voice answered. Julia introduced herself and asked to speak with someone about the Emily Watts case. "I think I found something," she said carefully. "I was hiking. I found something in the forest behind the school. A charm. Her name's on it." The woman's voice sharpened. "Stay on the line, ma'am. An officer will be with you shortly." 15 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up in front of her house. A man in his early 40s stepped out. Officer David Reyes. Neatly dressed, calm eyes, the kind of face that had seen too many sad stories. Julia showed him the drawings, then the charm. He didn't speak for a while. "You said your son drew these?" he finally asked. "Yes, every day since we got here. I didn't understand them at first, but now I think he saw something." Reyes rubbed his jaw. "No one's been willing to say that out loud in this town." "Say what?" "That Emily didn't just wander off." He looked at the forest through the window. "Some folks believe the woods take people. But people take people, Miss Carter. The woods just hide the truth." He held up the charm gently. "I'll take this to evidence. Thank you for coming forward." As he turned to leave, Julia asked, "Do you have children, Officer Reyes?" He paused. "I did." The door closed behind him. Later that night, Julia found Theo curled up on the couch, fast asleep. Another drawing was tucked under his arm. This one was the simplest yet, just a single X. And beside it, in soft gray pencil, a small figure drawn upright, looking out. Julia's hands shook. Was Theo saying Emily was still there? Still, waiting. It started with a whisper. Not from Theo, of course. His silence was sacred and stubborn. Julia had accepted that. No, this whisper came from someone else. A parent at the school, speaking just low enough that they weren't meant to be heard. Julia was picking Theo up early for a therapy appointment. She had signed him out at the front office and was waiting just outside when she caught it. He was here that day. Volunteer, supposedly. Just vanished after. Another voice responded, hushed. They never found a reason to question him. But still, creepy, isn't it? Julia pretended to scroll her phone, ears burning. He, volunteer, vanished. When Theo appeared at the office door, clutching his backpack with both hands, Julia gave him a smile. But her mind was spinning. That night, after Theo went to bed, Julia sat down with her laptop and searched for any names associated with the Emily Watts disappearance. Most articles were the same, vague, cautious, designed not to point fingers. But in one local blog post, buried deep in a comment thread from nearly a year ago, she found it. He was a school volunteer named Daniel Parrish. Left town right after it happened. Weird guy. Daniel Parrish. Julia leaned back slowly in her chair. The name rolled through her mind like a pebble hitting still water. She copied it down, then opened a new tab and searched. Daniel Parrish. Pine Haven. Daniel Parrish. Missing girl Daniel Parrish. Oregon volunteer. One result stood out. An old PTA newsletter that listed him as a parent volunteer for school cleanup events and a reading buddy program. Another was more interesting. A record of a used car title transfer to a Daniel Parrish in a neighboring town called Summerview, about 40 minutes east. The address was listed. Julia hesitated the next morning, keys in hand, glancing back at Theo, who sat quietly at the breakfast table with a pencil and blank sheet in front of him. "Would you be okay staying with Mrs. Green after school today?" she asked carefully. "Just for a little bit." He nodded once, eyes on his paper. She kissed the top of his head and lingered by the door. "Draw something nice today, okay?" He didn't answer, but as she left, she saw him press his pencil to the page with focused intensity. The drive to Summerview was uneventful, but Julia's hands wouldn't stop trembling. She had no real plan, just questions and a name, and a gut feeling that wouldn't let her sleep. The house was unremarkable. Single story, tan siding, trimmed hedges. A white pickup truck sat in the driveway. A faded Pine Haven PTA bumper sticker still clung to the back window. Julia parked across the street and waited, heart thudding. After a few minutes, the front door opened. A man in his mid-40s stepped out. Thinning hair, khakis, tidy sweater. She recognized him immediately from the photo in the newsletter. Daniel Parrish. He walked to the mailbox, removed a few envelopes, and turned back inside. She didn't follow. Not yet. She took a photo of the house, the plates, and the mailbox. Something about the man's posture had unnerved her. He looked ordinary, friendly even. But so had the other names she'd learned to avoid in the past. That evening, Theo's drawing was waiting on the kitchen table. This one was different. The lines weren't looping paths anymore. They were sharp, intentional. A square room, 4 walls, a door. And inside the room, drawn in red, a small circle with 2 dots for eyes. A face. Julia stared at it, her hands cold. It looked like someone was trapped. She pulled out the photos from earlier and lined them beside Theo's latest drawing. The face in the picture, the quiet man at the mailbox, looked nothing like the cartoon face Theo had drawn. But the square room, it resembled the storage shed Julia had glimpsed behind the school last week near the tree line, hidden by overgrowth. A place no child should have had access to, unless someone had let them in. The next morning, she walked Theo to school and asked Mrs. Haynes if they could speak privately. "Did Daniel Parrish have any kind of office on school grounds when he volunteered here?" Julia asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Haynes looked surprised. "Not officially. He was just a parent helper. He did have access to the old tool shed behind the gym. He helped repaint it once." Julia felt her throat tighten. "Did anyone ever search it?" she asked. Mrs. Haynes's expression shifted, uneasy now. "I don't think so. It's never locked. It's just where we keep cones and gardening supplies." Julia nodded. "Thank you." That afternoon, she returned, alone. The sun was low, casting golden light through the fence as she walked behind the school to the tree line. The tool shed stood silent, paint peeling, roof slightly caved. She tried the handle. It opened with a creak. It started with a whisper. Not from Theo, of course. His silence was sacred and stubborn. Julia had accepted that. No, this whisper came from someone else. A parent at the school, speaking just low enough that they weren't meant to be heard. Julia was picking Theo up early for a therapy appointment. She had signed him out at the front office and was waiting just outside when she caught it. He was here that day. Volunteer, supposedly. Just vanished after. Another voice responded. Hushed. They never found a reason to question him, but still. Creepy, isn't it? Julia pretended to scroll her phone, ears burning. He, volunteer, vanished. When Theo appeared at the office door, clutching his backpack with both hands, Julia gave him a smile. But her mind was spinning. That night, after Theo went to bed, Julia sat down with her laptop and searched for any names associated with the Emily Watts disappearance. Most articles were the same, vague, cautious, designed not to point fingers. But in one local blog post, buried deep in a comment thread from nearly a year ago, she found it. He was a school volunteer named Daniel Parrish. Left town right after it happened. Weird guy. Daniel Parrish. Julia leaned back slowly in her chair. The name rolled through her mind like a pebble hitting still water. She copied it down, then opened a new tab and searched Daniel Parrish, Pine Haven. Daniel Parrish, missing girl Daniel Parrish. Oregon volunteer. One result stood out. An old PTA newsletter that listed him as a parent volunteer for school cleanup events and a reading buddy program. Another was more interesting. A record of a used car title transfer to a Daniel Parrish in a neighboring town called Somerview, about 40 minutes east. The address was listed. Julia hesitated the next morning, keys in hand, glancing back at Theo, who sat quietly at the breakfast table with a pencil and blank sheet in front of him. "Would you be okay staying with Mrs. Green after school today?" she asked carefully. "Just for a little bit." He nodded once, eyes on his paper. She kissed the top of his head and lingered by the door. "Draw something nice today, okay?" He didn't answer, but as she left, She saw him press his pencil to the page with focused intensity. The drive to Summerview was uneventful, but Julia's hands wouldn't stop trembling. She had no real plan, just questions, and a name, and a gut feeling that wouldn't let her sleep. The house was unremarkable. Single story, tan siding, trimmed hedges. A white pickup truck sat in the driveway. A faded Pine Haven PTA bumper sticker still clung to the back window. Julia parked across the street and waited, heart thudding. After a few minutes, the front door opened. A man in his mid-40s stepped out. Thinning hair, khakis, tidy sweater. She recognized him immediately from the photo in the newsletter. Daniel Parrish. He walked to the mailbox, removed a few envelopes, and turned back inside. She didn't follow. Not yet. She took a photo of the house, the plates, and the mailbox. Something about the man's posture had unnerved her. He looked ordinary, friendly even, but so had the other names she'd learned to avoid in the past. That evening, Theo's drawing was waiting on the kitchen table. This one was different. The lines weren't looping paths anymore. They were sharp, intentional. A square room, 4 walls, a door, and inside the room, drawn in red, a small circle with 2 dots for eyes, a face. Julia stared at it, her hands cold. It looked like someone was trapped. She pulled out the photos from earlier and lined them beside Theo's latest drawing. The face in the picture, the quiet man at the mailbox, looked nothing like the cartoon face Theo had drawn. But the square room, it resembled the storage shed Julia had glimpsed behind the school last week, near the tree line, hidden by overgrowth, a place no child should have had access to, unless someone had let them in. The next morning, she walked Theo to school and asked Mrs. Haynes if they could speak privately. Did Daniel Parrish have any kind of office on school grounds when he volunteered here? Julia asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Haynes looked surprised. Not officially. He was just a parent helper. He did have access to the old tool shed behind the gym. He helped repaint it once. Julia felt her throat tighten. Did anyone ever search it? She asked. Mrs. Haynes's expression shifted, uneasy now. I don't think so. It's never locked. It's just where we keep cones and gardening supplies. Julia nodded. Thank you. That afternoon, she returned. Alone. The sun was low, casting golden light through the fence as she walked behind the school to the tree line. The tool shed stood silent, paint peeling, roof slightly caved. She tried the handle. It opened with a creak. Inside, it smelled of old paint and mildew. Rakes, orange traffic cones, empty shelves. But behind one shelf, there was a faint scuff mark on the floor, like something had been moved recently. She leaned in and saw it. A small patch of fabric, frayed, pink. Julia's knees went weak. Before she could reach for it, something behind her snapped, a branch underfoot. She turned quickly, heart hammering. No one was there. Julia locked the front door twice that night, not because she believed someone was watching her, though that feeling was getting harder to shake, but because it gave her something to control. Theo was upstairs, unusually quiet, even for him. He hadn't drawn anything since he came home. No blank page at the table, no sketch pad in his lap. Just silence. She didn't push him. She needed to process what she had seen. The shed had been disturbed. Someone had moved that shelf recently, and the scrap of pink fabric, small, old, buried under dirt and dust, couldn't be a coincidence. Emily, the charm, the drawings, the spiral paths. It was all circling back, narrowing in like a spotlight on a truth she didn't yet understand. At 1:17 a.m., she awoke to the sound of scratching. Soft, rhythmic. She stepped into the hallway and saw the light on under Theo's door. She knocked gently. Theo? No answer. She opened it slowly. Theo was sitting on the floor in the middle of the room, papers spread around him like puzzle pieces. His pencil moved rapidly across a fresh page, hands smudged with graphite. He didn't look up. Julia knelt beside him and glanced at the drawing. This one wasn't a map. It was a face. Not a cartoon this time. It was jagged, angular. The eyes were large and hollow, the mouth flat. Around the face, circles, loops of pattern that rippled outward like a stone dropped into water. And written at the bottom, in Theo's unmistakable scrawl, he watched. Julia swallowed hard. "Theo," she whispered, "is this the person who hurt Emily?" He didn't nod, didn't shake his head, but he pointed to the face. Then he pointed to the back of the page, where he'd scribbled something else. A symbol, the same one he had drawn days ago. The triangle with a dot in the center. A part of her wanted to cry. Another part wanted to scream. Instead, she took a breath. "Can you show me where you saw him?" she asked softly. Theo didn't answer, but he picked up another piece of paper and started drawing again. The next morning, Julia met Officer Reyes at the Pine Haven police station. She showed him the latest sketches. The eyes, the symbol, the strange pattern Theo had drawn around the face. "He's trying to tell us something," she said. "I think he saw the man." Parrish. Reyes studied the pages in silence. Then he pulled out a file and laid a photograph on the desk. Julia's breath hitched. It was Parrish, slightly younger. No smile. "Is this the man in the drawing?" Reyes asked. "I can't say for sure," she replied. "But Theo keeps drawing that same symbol around him, a triangle with a dot. What does it mean?" Reyes hesitated. "We've seen it before," he said. "Not officially, but years ago, a boy went missing in a town not far from here. Same age as Emily. His brother claimed someone watched them from the woods, drew the same symbol on a tree before he vanished." Julia stared at him. "And you're telling me no one followed up on that?" "There wasn't enough to go on," Reyes said grimly. "Until now." He stood and reached for his keys. "We're searching the shed today." They arrived at the school as the final bell rang. Reyes had a warrant in hand, and Julia stayed close but out of view as he approached the shed. Theo sat beside her in the car, holding his sketchbook like a shield. Reyes opened the shed. Julia watched from the curb, holding her breath. A second officer joined him. They moved shelves, lifted floorboards, shined flashlights into the shadows. Then Reyes stepped out, holding something. A small pink sneaker. He held it carefully, as if afraid it would disappear. Theo leaned forward in the seat, his eyes suddenly wide. He tapped his sketchbook rapidly. Julia opened it. The page he'd drawn earlier that morning was now filled with overlapping tree trunks. And in the center, a door. Beneath the door, the words, "She's still there." Back at home, Julia watched as Theo arranged his drawings on the living room floor. He did it without speaking, laying them side by side until the images formed one giant, sprawling picture. It wasn't just a map now. It was a timeline, a story, a journey through the woods. The face in the trees, the hiding place, the marks, the girl, the door. Theo stood beside it, head tilted slightly. "Did you see her, Theo?" Julia asked gently. "Emily?" For the first time in weeks, his mouth moved. "She waved," he whispered. Julia knelt down and hugged him, careful not to squeeze too hard. "She's brave," she whispered back. "Just like you." That night, as she tucked Theo into bed, he looked at her with quiet intensity. "Don't let him come back," he said. It was only 5 words, but it was everything. Julia didn't sleep. She lay in bed, eyes open, the ceiling above her dissolving into shapes. Triangle with a dot, wide, hollow eyes. A door in the woods. A girl waving from somewhere no one could see. By sunrise, she was up, dressed, and had made a decision. She wouldn't wait for the system. Not again. At 8 a.m. sharp, Julia dropped Theo off at school. Mrs. Green, their neighbor, agreed to pick him up and keep him for the evening. Julia had told her it was for an errand. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Julia had written the name Daniel Parrish on a sticky note and placed it on the dashboard of her car like a reminder. A target. She pulled out of Pine Haven and headed east. Summerview looked even quieter in daylight. Its roads were freshly swept, lawns trimmed, sidewalks chalked with half-finished hopscotch games. Julia drove past the address she'd seen online and parked one street down. The white truck was still in the driveway. She rehearsed the story in her mind. Something casual, harmless. Just a mom, just a neighbor, curious, friendly. She knocked on the door with a confidence she didn't feel. Footsteps inside. The click of a lock. The door opened. Daniel Parrish looked exactly the same as he had last week. Neat, ordinary, forgettable. Yes? Julia offered a smile. Sorry to bother you. I'm from Pine Haven. My son just started at the elementary school, and your name came up as someone who used to volunteer. I thought maybe you'd have tips for settling in. His eyes flickered. Just a second. Then the smile returned. Wow, that was a while ago. I haven't been back there in, must be a year. Julia kept smiling. Was it a good experience? He nodded. Yeah, sure. I helped with cleanup days, read to a few classes. Nothing major, just wanted to help out. She noticed his hands, steady, clipped fingernails, a faint paint stain on one wrist. You must miss it, she said. A pause, then, not really. She left after 15 minutes. No accusations, no questions about Emily. Just small talk, tight smiles, and the hum of practiced normalcy. But as she pulled away, she saw it. A large flashlight on the passenger seat of his truck. The same kind she'd seen him carrying into the woods a week ago, the night she followed him from afar. She turned the corner, parked a block away, and waited. At 11:52 a.m., Parrish left the house, got into the truck, drove. Julia followed. He didn't drive far, just a few miles outside town. Then he turned onto a gravel road that wound into the woods. She pulled over, killed the engine, and waited until he disappeared down the trail. Then she followed on foot, careful, quiet. The trees thickened quickly. The path narrowed, dipped, and then rose again. She kept a steady distance, heart pounding. Then she saw him. Parrish stood at the entrance to a clearing, facing a small, half-rotted structure tucked behind vines and trees. It wasn't quite a shed. More like an old, single-room shelter, long forgotten, not on any map. He unlocked a padlock. Julia ducked behind a tree. He disappeared inside. She crept closer, staying low. The air was damp, heavy. The trees overhead cast long shadows across the ground. From this angle, she could see inside the building through a cracked window. Inside were drawings, taped to the wall. Children's drawings, faded from time and water damage. One was of a house. Another, a girl with a pink shirt and long braids. There were also toys, a small unicorn plush, a cracked pink bracelet. A pair of children's shoes lined up near the door. Julia's knees almost gave out. She reached for her phone. Hands trembling, she took photos. Every inch she could see through the window. Evidence, proof. Then she backed away, slow, steady, and stepped on a twig. Snap. Inside, Parrish's head turned sharply. Julia didn't wait. She ran. Branches clawed at her arms, but she didn't stop. She could hear footsteps now, crunching fast behind her. The car! Just make it to the car! She burst out of the trees and sprinted across the clearing toward the road, lungs burning, heart pounding. Behind her, silence. No footsteps. She didn't turn around. She dove into the driver's seat, started the engine, and peeled out, gravel spitting behind her tires. She drove straight to the Pine Haven Police Department. Officer Reyes was at the front desk, sipping coffee. She threw the photos on the counter. He has a cabin in the woods, off Route 9. Kid stuff inside, drawings, clothes, a bracelet I think belonged to Emily. Reyes didn't speak for several seconds. Then he stood, nodded once, and motioned to another officer. "Get a team," he said. "Now." That night, as Julia sat beside Theo's bed, he handed her a new drawing. A forest, a small house, an open door, and a girl standing just outside it, facing the light. The forest was sealed off by dawn. Crime scene tape fluttered between the trees. Officers moved in tight, silent patterns. Gloved hands, steady cameras, words spoken only in clipped phrases. What had once been a forgotten shelter was now a centerpiece. Julia stood at the edge, beside Officer Reyes, watching as the past was uncovered one layer at a time. "They found the bracelet," he said quietly. "Same one from the Watts family photo. DNA test will take time, but we know it's hers." He paused, then added, "There were others too. Items that don't match Emily. Old toys, drawings in different styles, names we haven't placed yet." Julia's stomach turned. "How far back does it go?" "We don't know." Reyes shook his head. "That building, it's not even listed on old land surveys. Someone used it for years and made sure no one noticed." Julia glanced toward the structure. "Parrish?" Reyes didn't answer right away. "We picked him up just after midnight. Quiet, cooperative, too calm. Said he was out for a walk, claimed he hasn't been to Pine Haven in over a year." She folded her arms tightly. "And you believe that?" Reyes exhaled slowly. "Let's just say, we don't rely on belief anymore." Back at home, Theo was waiting. He sat cross-legged on the living room rug, drawing as if the world depended on it. The paper was large this time, his lines slower, more deliberate. Julia knelt beside him. "They found her things," she whispered. "Your drawings helped, Theo. You helped them see." He didn't speak, but he looked at her, really looked. Like a boy no longer haunted by the need to hold it all in. He slid the new drawing toward her. It was different than the others. The trees were still there, but now daylight streamed between them. The triangle and dot symbol was faded, tucked into a corner, almost forgotten. And in the center of the page were three figures: a woman, a small boy, and a girl with braids standing beside them, eyes open, facing forward. "She's free now," Julia whispered. Theo nodded once. Later that day, Reyes returned with updates. They've confirmed the structure was likely used over multiple years. Emily's case has been officially reopened and upgraded. He paused. "We also found something else." Julia waited. A second name, Micah Dreyer. He was one of Parrish's former students when he taught part-time in a different district. The name was etched into one of the old walls inside the cabin. And he's alive, lives about 3 towns over, had a few legal incidents, petty theft, vagrancy, but nothing stuck. When we questioned him this morning, he panicked. "Did he know Emily?" Reyes nodded. "He said Parrish brought him out to the cabin once years ago. Said he was told it was a clubhouse, a place for secret games and quiet talks. But the way he described it wasn't innocent." Julia felt cold creep up her spine. "Why didn't he come forward?" "He was a kid," Reyes said. "Scared, confused. And then he ran." That night, Julia sat on the porch, the sun dipping low behind the trees. Theo sat beside her, a juice box in hand, eyes on the horizon. "I think you saved her," she said softly. Theo didn't respond right away, but then he leaned against her shoulder, gentle and tired, and whispered, "She saved me too." They found the second room beneath the floorboards. It was Officer Reyes who called Julia personally, voice tense but controlled. "Under the old cabin," he said. "A hatch, camouflaged under loose planks, small, sealed for who knows how long." Julia gripped the phone tighter. "Was it?" He didn't finish the question. He didn't need to. "They found bones," he said finally. Not just one set. She closed her eyes. By late afternoon, the news had broken. The Pine Haven Elementary School locked down temporarily. Reporters lined the perimeter of the forest with cameras and notebooks. Drones buzzed above the tree canopy like curious flies. Julia kept Theo home. She didn't turn on the TV. She didn't need to see the headlines to understand what they'd uncovered. The structure Parrish used had been more than a hiding place. It had been a holding space, a pattern. A secret passed through silence. Now, no longer hidden, at the kitchen table, Julia sat with Reyes, who looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. Emily's remains weren't in that second room, he said. But another girl's were. Names not confirmed yet. The items match a case from 12 years ago. Different town, same age, same story. He shook his head. Parrish's teaching records show a disturbing pattern. Short-term assignments, volunteer roles. Every district he worked in has at least one missing person case involving a child. Julia felt the floor sway under her feet. Why wasn't he caught sooner? Reyes didn't answer. Not at first. Because he was careful, quiet. He picked children no one knew were watching. That night, Theo brought her a new drawing. It wasn't frightening. It was calm. The woods, yes, but now in color. The trees glowed golden, and between them, small silhouettes walked together side by side. One of the figures looked like a girl, holding hands with a boy. At the bottom, Theo had written one word. Found. The next morning, Julia got a call from a woman she didn't recognize. Micah Dreyer, the voice said. He's at the station. He asked to speak to you. Julia hesitated. Why me? He said you're the only person who looked, the only one who listened. She drove to the station with her hands cold on the wheel. Inside, Micah sat across from her, pale and jittery. Maybe 22 now. His eyes flicked between hers and the table. I didn't know what it was, he said. Back then, I thought it was just pretend. You were a kid, Julia said gently. No. His voice cracked. I saw Emily, not her face. Just the way she moved, quiet, trapped. I told myself it was a game. I told myself she'd gone home after. He rubbed his hands over his face. I didn't say anything, and he said if I did, no one would believe me. Julia let the silence stretch. Micah looked up. But your kid. He remembered what no one else could. He saw it, didn't he? She nodded, and he wasn't even there. Micah let out a soft, broken laugh. That's the part that gets me. I was there, and I stayed quiet. Julia leaned forward. You're not quiet anymore. The next day, a press conference was held. Reyes stood at the podium, composed but tired. Evidence gathered at the Pine Haven site has led to the reopening of multiple cold cases. Daniel Parrish is now in custody and facing federal charges related to the confirmed concealment of at least 2 children. Further charges are pending identification of remains and corroborated witness statements. No one clapped. No one needed to. Back home, Julia and Theo sat outside under the early evening sky. The town behind them was quiet. The trees in front of them whispered, but gently now, like they were settling. Theo handed her one last drawing. No X, no dark eyes, no door, just a clearing and sunlight everywhere. The forest behind the school was quiet again. For the first time since moving to Pine Haven, Julia stood at its edge without fear. The path that had once felt like a threshold into something unknowable now looked simply like trees, leaves, light filtering through green. No secrets today. Just space. Theo walked beside her, his small hand in hers. He was humming under his breath, a soft, tuneless sound that filled the silence better than any words. At the clearing they stopped. The stones had been moved respectfully. A wooden bench now stood where the pile had been. A plaque had been placed there by the community, with help from the PTA. In memory, in courage, in truth, Julia sat. Theo stood quietly, staring at the spot where he'd once drawn an X. They said they're going to name a program after you, she told him softly. A new one for children who see things others miss, who notice what gets hidden. Theo looked at her. Then, after a long pause, he said, "She's gone now." It was only 3 words, but they landed like a sunrise. Julia reached for him. He didn't pull away. "Do you miss her?" she asked gently. Theo nodded. "She said thank you," he added. Julia's throat tightened. "I bet she did." Over the following weeks, Pine Haven began to settle. News vans disappeared. The caution tape came down. The school resumed its rhythm, slower now, but steadier. Parents lingered longer at drop-off. Teachers watched the woods with a new kind of reverence. Daniel Parrish's trial was pending. There would be more coverage, more testimony, more pain for families still waiting on answers. But there was truth now. There was light. Sometimes that was enough to begin. One Saturday, Julia drove Theo to the library. He walked up to the shelf on his own and selected a picture book about space. He brought it to the counter and handed it to the librarian without looking down. He said, "Thank you," softly but clearly. Julia nearly wept. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the children's section, reading side by side, their quietness filled with pages and warmth. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but it didn't sound like whispers anymore. It just sounded like home. Before you go, hit subscribe. Because this story, it's not done watching you.